Welcome to my book nook.
Welcome back to my book nook, where we are reading The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. And if you remember, we just left where Christopher promised his dad he would quit looking for whoever murdered Wentworth the dog. He had to promise. And you remember, Christopher can't lie. Being on the spectrum, that's something interesting that most people don't understand. They cannot tell a lie. Everything is very, very factual to them. So something to think about when you are in a conversation or in any relationship with someone who is on the spectrum. Sometimes that can be detrimental, because if you say, do these jeans make me look fatter? You might get an answer you didn't expect. So, all right, we are on chapter 83, prime number 83. I think I would make a very good astronaut. To be a good astronaut, you have to be intelligent, and I'm intelligent. You also have to understand how machines work, and I'm good at understanding how machines work. You also have to be someone who would like being on their own in a tiny spacecraft, thousands and thousands of miles away from the surface of the Earth, and not panic or get claustrophobia or homesick or insane. And I really like little spaces, so long as there is no one else in them with me. Sometimes when I want to be on my own, I get into the airing cupboard outside the bathroom and slide in beside the boiler and pull the door closed behind me and sit there and think for hours, and it makes me feel very calm. So I would have to be an astronaut on my own, or have my own part of the spacecraft which no one else could come into. And also, there are no yellow things or brown things in a spacecraft, so that would be okay too. And I would have to talk to other people from mission control, but we would do that through a radio link up and a TV monitor, so they wouldn't be like real people who are strangers, but it would be like playing a computer game. Also, I wouldn't be homesick at all, because I'd be surrounded by lots of the things I like, which are machines and computers and outer space. And I'd be able to look out of a little window in the spacecraft and know that there was no one else near me for thousands and thousands of miles, which is what I sometimes pretend at night in the summer when I go and lie on the lawn and look up at the sky and put my hands around the side of my face so that I can't see the fence and the chimney and the washing line, and I can pretend I'm in space. And all I could see would be stars. And stars are the places where the molecules that life is made up of were constructed billions of years ago. For example, all the iron in your blood, which stops you from being anemic, was made in a star. And I would like it if I could take Toby with me into space, and that might be allowed because they sometimes do take animals into space for experiments. So if I could think of a good experiment you could do with a rat that didn't hurt the rat, I could make them let me maybe take Toby. But if they didn't let me, I would still go, because it would be a dream come true. Chapter 89. The next day at school, I told Sybonnet that Father had told me I couldn't do any more detecting, which meant that the book was finished. I showed her the pages I'd written so far with the diagram of the universe and the map of the street and the prime numbers, and she said that it didn't matter. She said that the book was really good as it was, and that I should be very proud of having written a book at all, even if it was quite short. And there were some very good books which were very short, like Heart of Darkness, which was by Conrad. But I said that it wasn't a proper book because it didn't have a proper ending, because I never found out who killed Wellington, so the murderer was still at large. And she said that that was like life. Not all murders were solved, and not all murderers were caught, like Jack the Ripper. I said I still didn't like the idea that the murderer was still at large. I said I didn't like to think that the person who killed Wellington could be living somewhere nearby, and I might meet him when I went out for a walk at night. And this was possible because a murder was usually committed by a person who was known to the victim. Then I said, Father said I was never to mention Mrs. Shear's name in our house again, and that he was an evil man, and maybe that meant he was the person who killed Wellington. And she said, perhaps your father just doesn't like Mr. Shears very much. And I asked, why? And she said, I don't know, Christopher. I don't know because I don't know anything about Mr. Shears. I said, Mr. Shears used to be married to Mrs. Shears, and he left her like a divorce, but I don't know if they were actually divorced. And Saibon said, well, Mrs. Shears is a friend of yours, isn't she? A friend of you and your father, so perhaps your father doesn't like Mr. Shears because he left Mrs. Shears, because he did something bad to someone who is a friend. And I said, Father says Mrs. Shears isn't a friend of ours anymore. And Saibon said, I'm sorry, Christopher, I wish I could answer all these questions, but I simply don't know. Then the bell went for the end of school. The next day I saw 4 yellow cars in a row on the way to school, which made it a black day. So I didn't eat anything at lunch. I sat in the corner of the room all day and read my A-level math course book. And the next day, too, I saw 4 yellow cars in a row on the way to school, which made it another black day. So I didn't speak to anyone, and for the whole afternoon I sat in the corner of the library groaning with my head pressed into the join between the 2 walls, and this made me feel calm and safe. But on the 3rd day I kept my eyes closed all the way to school until we got off the bus, because after I have had 2 black days in a row, I'm allowed to do that. Chapter 97. But it wasn't the end of the book, because 5 days later I saw 5 red cars in a row, which made it a super good day, and I knew that something special was going to happen. Nothing special happened at school, so I knew something special was going to happen after school. And when I got home, I went down to the shop at the end of our road to buy some licorice laces and a Milky Bar with my pocket money. And when I had bought my licorice laces and a Milky Bar, I turned around and saw Mrs. Alexander, the old lady from number 39, who was in the shop as well. She wasn't wearing jeans now. She was wearing a dress like a normal old lady, and she smelled of cooking. She said, what happened to you the other day? I asked, which day? And she said, I came out again and you'd gone. I had to eat all the biscuits myself. I said, I went away. And she said, well, I gathered that. I said, I thought you might ring the police. And she said, why on earth would I do that? And I said, because I was poking my nose into other people's business, and Father said I shouldn't investigate who killed Wellington. And a policeman gave me a caution, and if I get into trouble again, it will be a lot worse because of the caution. Then the Indian lady behind the counter said to Mrs. Alexander, can I help you? And Mrs. Alexander said she'd like a pint of milk and a pack of Jaffa cakes, and I went out of the shop. When I was outside the shop, I saw that Mrs. Alexander's dachshund was sitting on the pavement. It was wearing a little coat made out of tartan material, which is Scottish and check. She had tied its lead to the drain pipe next to the door. I like dogs, so I bent down and I said hello to her dog, and it licked my hand. Its tongue was rough and wet, and it liked the smell on my trousers and started sniffing them. Then Mrs. Alexander came outside and said, his name is Ivor. I didn't say anything, and Mrs. Alexander said, you're very shy, aren't you, Christopher? And I said, I'm not allowed to talk to you. And she said, don't worry, I'm not going to tell the police, and I'm not going to tell your father, because there's nothing wrong with having a chat. Having a chat is just being friendly, isn't it? I said, I can't do chatting. Then she said, do you like computers? And I said, yes, I like computers. I have a computer at home in my bedroom. And she said, I know. I can see you sitting at your computer in your bedroom sometimes when I look across the street. Then she untied Ivor's lead from the drain pipe. I wasn't going to say anything because I didn't want to get into trouble. Then I thought that this was a super good day and something special hadn't happened yet, so it was possible that talking to Mrs. Alexander was a special thing that was going to happen. And I thought she might tell me something about Wellington or about Mr. Shears without me asking her, so that wouldn't be breaking my promise. So I said, and I like maths and looking after Toby, and also I like outer space and I like being on my own. And she said, I bet you're very good at maths, aren't you? And I said, I am. I'm going to do my A-level maths next month, and I am going to get an A grade. And Mrs. Alexander said, really? A-level maths? I replied, yes, I don't tell lies. And she said, I apologize. I didn't mean to suggest that you were lying. I just wondered if I heard you correctly. I'm a little deaf sometimes. And I said, I remember. You told me. And then I said, I'm the first person to do an A-level from my school because it's a special school. And she said, well, I am very impressed, and I hope you do get an A. And I said, I will. Then she said, and the other thing I know about you is that your favorite color is not yellow. And I said, no, and it's not brown either. My favorite color is red and metal color. Then Ivor did a poo, and Mrs. Alexander picked it up with her hand inside a little plastic bag, and then she turned the plastic bag inside out, tied a knot in the top so that the poo was all sealed up and she didn't touch the poo with her hands. And then I did some reasoning. I reasoned that Father had only made me do a promise about 5 things, which were 1, not to mention Mr. Shear's name in our house, 2, not to go asking Mrs. Shears about who killed that bloody dog, 3, not to go asking anyone who killed that bloody dog, 4, not to go trespassing in other people's gardens, and 5, to stop this ridiculous bloody detective game. And asking about Mr. Shears wasn't any of these things. And if you are a detective, you have to take risks. And this was a super good day, which meant it was a good day for taking risks. So I said, do you know Mr. Shears? Which was like chatting. And Mrs. Alexander said, no, not really. No, I mean, I knew him well enough to say hello and talk to him a little in the street, but I didn't know much about him. I think he worked in a bank, the National Westminster, in town. And I said, Father says that he is an evil man. Do you know why he said that? Is Mr. Shears an evil man? And Mrs. Alexander said, why are you asking me about Mr. Shears, Christopher? I didn't say anything because I didn't want to be investigating Wellington's murder, and that was the reason I was asking about Mr. Shears. But Mrs. Alexander said, is this about Wellington? And I nodded because that didn't count as being a detective. Mrs. Alexander didn't say anything. She walked to the little red box on a pole next to the gate to the park, and she put Ivor's poo in the box, which was a brown thing inside a red thing, which made my head feel funny, so I didn't look. Then she walked back to me. She sucked in a big breath and said, perhaps it would be best not to talk about these things, Christopher. And I asked, why not? And she said, because. Then she stopped and decided to start saying a different sentence. Because maybe your father is right, and you shouldn't go around asking questions about this. And I asked, why? And she said, because obviously he's going to find it quite upsetting. And I said, why is he going to find it upsetting? Then she sucked in another big breath and said, because I think you know why your father doesn't like Mr. Shears very much. Then I asked, did Mr. Shears kill Mother? And Mrs. Alexander said, kill her? And I said, yes, did he kill Mother? And Mrs. Alexander said, no, of course he didn't kill Mother. Your mother. And I said, but did he give her stress so that she died of a heart attack? And Mrs. Alexander said, I honestly don't know what you're talking about, Christopher. And I said, or did he hurt her so that she had to go into hospital? And Mrs. Alexander said, did she have to go into hospital? And I said, yes. And it wasn't very suspicious at first, but she had a heart attack when she was in the hospital. And Mrs. Alexander said, oh my goodness. I said, and she died. And Mrs. Alexander said, oh my goodness, again. And then she said, oh, Christopher, I am so sorry. I never realized. And then I asked her, why did you say, I think you know why your father doesn't like Mr. Shears very much? And Mrs. Alexander put her hand over her mouth and said, oh, dear. But she didn't answer my question. So I asked her the same question again, because in a murder mystery novel, when someone doesn't want to answer a question, it's because they're trying to keep a secret or trying to stop someone from getting into trouble, which means that the answer to those questions are the most important answers of all. And that is why the detective has to put that person under pressure. But Mrs. Alexander still didn't answer. Instead, she asked me a question. She said, "So you don't know?" And I said, "Don't know what?" She replied, "Christopher, look, I probably shouldn't be telling you this." And then she said, "Perhaps we should take a little walk in the park together. This is not the place to be talking about this kind of thing." I was nervous. I did not know Mrs. Alexander. I knew that she was an old lady and that she liked dogs, but she was a stranger. And I never go into the park on my own because it is dangerous, and people inject drugs behind the public toilets in the corner. I wanted to go home and go up to my room and feed Toby and practice some maths. But I was excited, too, because I thought she might tell me a secret. And the secret might be about who killed Wellington, or about Mr. Shears. And if she did that, I might have more evidence against him, or be able to exclude him from my investigation. So, because it was a super good day, I decided to walk into the park with Mrs. Alexander, even though it scared me. When we were inside the park, Mrs. Alexander stopped walking and said, "I'm going to say something to you, and you must promise not to tell your father that I told you this." And I asked, "Why?" And she said, "I shouldn't have said what I said, and if I don't explain, you'll carry on wondering what I meant. And you might ask your father, and I don't want you to do that because I don't want you to upset him. So I'm going to explain why I said what I said, but before I do that, you have to promise not to tell anyone I said this to you." And I asked, "Why?" And she said, "Christopher, please just trust me." And I said, "I promise." Because if Mrs. Alexander told me who killed Wellington, or she told me that Mr. Shears had really killed Mother, I could still go to the police and tell them, because you are allowed to break a promise if someone has committed a crime and you know about it. And Mrs. Alexander said, "Your mother, before she died, was very good friends with Mr. Shears." And I said, "I know." And she said, "No, Christopher, I'm not sure that you do. I mean that they were very good friends. Very, very good friends." I thought about this for a while and said, "Do you mean that they were doing sex?" And Mrs. Alexander said, "Yes, Christopher, that is what I mean." Then she didn't say anything for about 30 seconds. Then she said, "I'm sorry, Christopher, but I really didn't mean to say anything that was going to upset you, but I wanted to explain why I said what I said. You see, I thought you knew. That's why your father thinks that Mr. Shears is an evil man. And that will be why he doesn't want you going around talking to people about Mr. Shears, because that will bring back bad memories." And I said, "Was that why Mr. Shears left Mrs. Shears, because he was doing sex with someone else when he was married to Mrs. Shears?" And Mrs. Alexander said, "Yes, I expect so." Then she said, "I'm sorry, Christopher, I really am." And I said, "I think I should go now." And she said, "Are you okay, Christopher?" And I said, "I'm scared of being in the park with you because you're a stranger." And she said, "I'm not a stranger, Christopher, I'm a friend." And I said, "I'm going home now." And she said, "If you want to talk about this, you can come and see me anytime you want. You only have to knock on my door." And I said, "Okay." And she said, "Christopher?" And I said, "What?" And she said, "You won't tell your father about this conversation, will you?" And I said, "No, I promised." And she said, "You go on home and remember what I said, any time." And then I went home. Chapter 101. Mr. Jevons said that I liked maths because it was safe. He said I liked maths because it meant solving problems, and these problems were difficult and interesting, but there was always a straightforward answer at the end. And what he meant was that maths wasn't like life, because in life there are no straightforward answers at the end. I know he meant this because this is what he said. This is because Mr. Jevons doesn't understand numbers. Here's a famous story called the Monty Hall problem, which I've included in this book because it illustrates what I mean. There used to be a column called Ask Marilyn in a magazine called Parade in America. And this column was written by Marilyn Vos Savant. And in the magazine it said that she had the highest IQ in the world in the Guinness Book of World Records Hall of Fame. And in the column, she answered maths questions sent in by readers. And in September 1990, this question was sent in by Craig F. Whitaker of Columbia, Maryland. But it is not what is called a direct quote because I made it simpler and easier to understand. You're on a game show on television. On this game show, the idea is to win a car or as a prize. The game show host shows you 3 doors. He says that there is a car behind one of the doors and there are goats behind the other 2 doors. He asks you to pick a door. You pick a door, but the door is not opened. Then the game show host opens one of the doors you didn't pick to show a goat because he knows what is behind the doors. Then he says that you have one final chance to change your mind before the doors are open and you get a car or a goat. So he asks if you want to change your mind and pick the other unopened door instead. What should you do? Marilyn Vos Savant said that you should always change and pick the final door because the chances are 2 in 3 that there will be a car behind that door. But if you use your intuition, you think that chance is 50-50 because you think there is an equal chance that the car is behind any door. Lots of people wrote to the magazine to say that Marilyn Vos Savant was wrong, even when she explained very carefully why she was right. Of the letters she got about the problem, 92% said that she was wrong, and lots of these were from mathematicians and scientists. Here are some of the things that they said. I am very concerned with the general public's lack of mathematical skills. Please help by confessing your error. Robert Sachs, PhD, George Mason University. There's enough mathematical illiteracy in this country. We don't need the world's highest IQ propagating more. Shame. Scott Smith, PhD, University of Florida. I am in shock that after being corrected by at least 3 mathematicians, you still do not see your mistake. Kent Ford, Dickinson State University. I am sure you will receive many letters from high school and college students. Perhaps you should keep a few addresses for help with future columns. W. Robert Smith, PhD, Georgia State University. You are utterly incorrect. How many irate mathematicians are needed to get you to change your mind? E. Ray Bobo, PhD, Georgetown University. If all those PhDs were wrong, the country would be in very serious trouble. Everett Harmon, PhD, U.S. Army Research Institute. But Marilyn Vos Savant was right. And here are 2 ways you can show this. Firstly, you can do it by maths like this. Let the doors be called X, Y, and Z. Let CX be the event that the car is behind the door X, and so on. Let HX be the event that the host opens door X, and so on. Supposing that you choose door X, the possibility that you win a car if you then switch your choice is given by the following formula. And honestly, let me see if you can see that. That is quite the formula. I'm not good at maths. But the second way you can work it out is by making a picture of all the possible outcomes like this. So it says you choose a door, you're asked to choose a door, and it just kind of goes on down, right? So if you change 2 times out of 3, you get a car. And if you stick, you only get a car 1 time out of 3. And this shows that intuition can sometimes get things wrong, and intuition is what people use in life to make decisions, but logic can help you work out the right answer. It also shows that Mr. Jevons was wrong, and numbers are sometimes very complicated and not very straightforward at all. And that is why I like the Monty Hall problem. Chapter 103. When I got home, Rodri was there. Rodri is the man who works for Father, helping him do heating maintenance and boiler repair, and he sometimes comes round to the house in the evening to drink beer with Father and watch the television and have a conversation. Rodri was wearing a pair of white dungarees which had dirty marks all over them, and he had a gold ring on the middle finger of his left hand, and he smelled of something I do not know the name of, which Father often smells of when he comes home from work. I put my licorice laces and my Milky Bar in my special food box on the shelf, which Father is not allowed to touch because it is mine. Then Father said, "And what have you been up to, young man?" And I said, "I went to the shop to get some licorice laces and a Milky Bar." And he said, "You were a long time." And I said, "I talked to Mrs. Alexander's dog outside the shop, and I stroked him, and he snipped my trousers," which was another white lie. Then Rodri said to me, "You do get the 3rd degree, don't you?" But I didn't know what the 3rd degree was. And he said, "So how are you doing, Captain?" And I said, I'm doing very well, thank you, which is what you're meant to say. And he said, what's 251 times 864? And I thought about this and I said, 216,864. Because it was a really easy sum, because you just multiply 864 by 1,000, which is 864,000. Then you divide it by 4, which is 216,000. And that's 250 times 864. And then you just add another 864 onto it to get 251 times 864, and that's 216,864. And I said, is that right? And Rodri said, I haven't got a bloody clue. And he laughed. I don't like it when Rodri laughs at me. Rodri laughs at me a lot. Father says it's being friendly. Then Father says, I'll stick one of those gooby aloe sag things in the oven for you, okay? This is because I like Indian food, because it has a strong taste, but gooby aloe sag is yellow. So I put red food coloring onto it before I eat it. And I keep a little plastic bottle of this in my special food box. And I said, okay. And Rodri said, so it looks like Parky stitched them up then. But this was said to Father, not to me. And Father said, well, those circuit boards look like they'd come out of the bloody ark. And Rodri said, are you going to tell them? And Father said, what's the point? They're hardly going to take him to court, are they? And Rodri said, that'll be the day. And Father said, best to let sleeping dogs lie, I reckon. Then I went into the garden. Sayabon said that when you are writing a book, you have to include some descriptions of things. I said that I could take photographs and put them in the book, but she said the idea of a book was to describe things using words so that people could read them and make a picture in their own head. And she said it was best to describe things that were interesting or different. She also said that I should describe people in the story by mentioning one or two details about them so that people could make a picture of them in their head, which is why I wrote about Mr. Jeevan's shoes with all the holes in them, and the policeman who looked at me as if he had 2 mice in his nose, and the thing Rodri smelled of, but I didn't know what the name for it. So I decided to do a description of the garden. But the garden wasn't very interesting or different. It was just a garden with grass and a shed and a clothesline. But the sky was interesting and different, because usually skies look boring because they're all blue or all gray or all covered in one pattern of clouds, and they don't look like they are hundreds of miles above your head. They look like someone might have painted them on a big roof. But this sky had lots of different types of clouds in it at different heights, so you could see how big it was, and this made it look enormous. Furthest away in the sky were lots of little white clouds, which looked like fish scales, or sand dunes, which had a very regular pattern. The next furthest away and to the west were some big clouds, which were colored slightly orange, because it was nearly evening and the sun was going down. The closest to the ground was a huge cloud, which was colored gray, because it was a rain cloud, and it was a big pointy shape that looked like this. And when I looked at it for a long time, I could see it moving very slowly. It was like an alien spaceship hundreds of kilometers away, like in Dune or Blake's 7, or Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Except that it wasn't made of solid material. It was made of droplets of condensed water vapor, which is what clouds are made of. And it could have been an alien spaceship. People think that alien spaceships would be solid and made of metal and have lights all over them and move slowly through the sky, because that is how we would build a spaceship if we were able to build one that big. But aliens, if they exist, would probably be very different from us. They might look like big slugs or be flat like reflections, or they might be bigger than planets, or they might not have bodies at all. They might just be information, like in a computer. And their spaceships might look like clouds, or be made up of unconnected objects like dust or leaves. Then I listened to the sounds in the garden. I could hear a bird singing. I could hear traffic noises, which was like the surf on a beach. And I could hear someone playing music somewhere and children shouting. And in between these noises, if I listened very carefully and I stood completely still, I could hear a tiny whining noise inside my ears and the air going in and out of my nose. Then I sniffed the air to see if I could see what the air in the garden smelled like. But I couldn't smell anything. It smelled of nothing. And this was interesting too. Then I went inside and fed Toby. Chapter 107. The Hound of the Baskervilles is my favorite book. In The Hound of the Baskervilles, Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson get a visit from James Mortimer, who is a doctor from the moors in Devon. James Mortimer's friend, Sir Charles Baskerville, has died of a heart attack, and James Mortimer thinks that he might have been scared to death. James Mortimer also has an ancient scroll which describes the curse of the Baskervilles. On this scroll it says that Sir Charles Baskerville had an ancestor called Sir Hugo Baskerville, who was a wild, profane, and godless man, and he also tried to do sex with the daughter of a yeoman, but she escaped, and he chased her across the moor, and his friends, who were daredevil roysters, chased after him. And when they found him, the daughter of the yeoman had died of exhaustion and fatigue, and they saw a great black beast, shaped like a hound, yet larger than any hound that ever mortal eye had rested on. And this hound was tearing the throat out of Sir Hugo Baskerville. And one of the friends died of fear that very night, and the other two were broken men for the rest of their days. James Mortimer thinks that the Hound of the Baskervilles might have scared Sir Charles to death, and he's worried that his son and heir, Sir Henry Baskerville, will be in danger when he goes to the Hall in Devon. So Sherlock Holmes sends Dr. Watson to Devon with Sir Henry Baskerville and James Mortimer, and Dr. Watson tries to work out who might have killed Sir Charles Baskerville. And Sherlock Holmes says he will stay in London, but he travels to Devon secretly and does investigation of his own. And Sherlock Holmes finds out that Sir Charles was killed by a neighbor called Stapleton, who is a butterfly collector and a distant relation to the Baskervilles. And Stapleton is poor, so he tries to kill Sir Henry Baskerville so that he will inherit the Hall. In order to do this, he has brought a huge dog from London and covered it in phosphorus to make it glow in the dark. And it was this dog which scared Sir Charles Baskerville to death. And Sherlock Holmes and Watson and Lestrade from Scotland Yard catch him. And Sherlock Holmes and Watson shoot the dog, which is one of the dogs which gets killed in the story, which is not nice because it's not the dog's fault. And Stapleton escapes into the Grimpen Mire, which is part of the moor, and he dies because he is sucked into a bog. There are some bits of the story I don't like. One bit is the ancient scroll because it's written in old language, which is difficult to understand, like this. Learn then from this story not to fear the fruits of the past, but rather to be circumspect in the future, that those foul passions whereby our family has suffered so grievously may not again be loosed to our undoing. And sometimes Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who is the author, describes people like this. There was something subtly wrong with the face, some coarseness of expression, some hardness perhaps of eye, some looseness of lip which marred its perfect beauty. And I don't know what some hardness perhaps of eye means, and I'm not interested in faces. But sometimes it is fun not knowing what the words mean because you can look them up in a dictionary, like goyle, which is a deep dip, or tors, which are hills or rocky heights. I like The Hound of the Baskervilles because it is a detective story, which means that there are clues and red herrings. These are some of the types of clues. 2 of Sir Henry Baskerville's boots go missing when he's staying at a London hotel. This means that someone wants to give them to the Hound of the Baskervilles to smell like a bloodhound so that it can chase him. This means that the Hound of the Baskervilles is not a supernatural being, but a real dog. Number 2, Stapleton is the only person who knows how to get through the Grimpen Mire, and he tells Watson to stay out of it for his own safety. This means that he's hiding something in the middle of the Grimpen Mire and doesn't want anyone else to find it. Number 3, Mrs. Stapleton tells Dr. Watson to go straight back to London instantly. This is because she thinks Dr. Watson is Sir Henry Baskerville, and she knows that her husband wants to kill him. And these are some of the red herrings. Number 1, Sherlock Holmes and Watson are followed when they are in London by a man in a coach with a black beard. This makes you think that the man is Barrymore, who's the caretaker at Baskerville Hall, because he's the only other person who has a black beard. But the man is really Stapleton, who is wearing a false beard. Number 2, Selden, the Notting Hill murderer. This is a man who has escaped from a prison nearby and is being hunted down on the moors, which makes you think that he has something to do with the story because he's a criminal, but he hasn't anything to do with the story at all. And number 3, the man on the tour. This is a silhouette of a man that Dr. Watson sees on the moor at night and doesn't recognize, which makes you think that it is the murderer, but it's Sherlock Holmes who's come to Devon secretly. I also like The Hound of the Baskervilles because I like Sherlock Holmes. And I think if I were a proper detective, he is the kind of detective I would be. He's very intelligent and he solves the mysteries. And he says, the world is full of obvious things which nobody by any chances ever observes. But he notices them like I do. Also, it says in the book, Sherlock Holmes had, in a very remarkable degree, the power of detaching his mind at will. And this is like me too, because if I get really interested in something like practicing maths or reading a book about the Apollo missions or great white sharks, I don't notice anything else. And Father can be calling me to come and eat my supper and I won't hear him. And this is why I'm very good at playing chess, because I detach my mind at will and concentrate on the board. And after a while, the person I am playing will stop concentrating and start scratching their nose or staring out in the window. And then they will make a mistake, and I will win. Also, Dr. Watson says about Sherlock Holmes, his mind was busy in endeavoring to frame some scheme into which all these strange and apparently disconnected episodes could be fitted. And that is what I'm trying to do by writing this book. Also, Sherlock Holmes doesn't believe in the supernatural, which is God, and fairy tales, and the hounds of hell, and curses, which are stupid things. And I am going to finish this chapter with 2 interesting facts about Sherlock Holmes. Number 1, in the original Sherlock Holmes stories, Sherlock Holmes is never described as wearing a deerstalker hat, which is what he is always wearing in pictures and cartoons. The deerstalker hat was invented by a man called Sidney Paget, who did the illustrations for the original books. Number 2, in the original Sherlock Holmes stories, Sherlock Holmes never says, "Elementary, my dear Watson." He only ever says this in films and on the television. We'll end there today, my friends. Hope you'll stick with us. Let me know in the comments how you're feeling about this book, and I look forward to reading those. Have a great day.